12. March 1975. Wedding, West Berlin. A man in his mid-40s places a lined notebook on a wood desk and writes a line he could not have said aloud at 16, 1945, outskirts of Berlin. They gave me a Panzerfaust and told me to stop tanks. In 1975, I tell my students, if anyone hands you a weapon at 16, run. His name in the school records is Carl M., born 1929. Volkssturm in 1945. Teacher by 1960. Pacifist by experience, not by ideology. The arithmetic of his adult life begins in May 1945, in rubble, in hunger, in the files of other people. 2. May 1945, Kaulsdorf, Eastern Berlin. The street is quiet except for artillery. Plaster dust coats his hair. He has a paper armband and a single-use anti-tank weapon he barely understands. The Soviet tanks are not stoppable, not by boys. We were told to be brave, he will write decades later, rounding the words so they will be legible to 16-year-olds. I was hungry, and I was afraid. The mathematics of food was already pressing. Bread for the last week, 200 grams. Potatoes, none. Water from the canal. Calories as strategy. Strategy as survival. In April and May of 1945, the city is a disassembled machine. Houses are stacks of brick. Trümmerfrauen will come from this, but in these days it is mostly the elderly and the desperate pulling children and stoves from unstable walls. An Allied intelligence summary for Berlin, dated 15 May 1945, notes widespread shock, fear of reprisals, food scarcity, and uncertainty about the city's administrative future. The words are aerial. The experience is granular. 9 May 1945, victory declared. The Soviet military administration establishes control in the eastern sectors. American and British patrols chart their zones in the west and south. French units arrive later. The mathematics of occupation begins. 4 powers. 1. 4 currencies soon. 1 hunger. Karl's family is a stateless unit within a capital that no longer functions. Father missing on the Oder since February. Mother alive but underfed and underemployed. Sister last seen in a column of refugees near Kistrin. Ration cards are counted like prayers. The occupation ordinance sets curfews, 2,100 hours, then 2,200, then a little later as darkness grows longer. The breakdown of time, measured in empty shelves. Occupation reports from the summer of 1945 record a rising death toll among infants and the elderly due to malnutrition and exposure. The hunger winter does not come yet. This is just the autumn. Cigarettes replace coins. Lucky Strikes and Chesterfields, 4 to a loaf of bread in some neighborhoods, 8 for a bottle of schnapps, 1 for a smile from someone who needs more than money. By September 1945, Berlin's ruins have their own economy. Black market tables appear at Potsdamer Platz, Lehrter Bahnhof, on corners where trams no longer run. I bargained for salt, Karl would later note in a private memorandum. 1 cigarette for a handful. I did not smoke before the war. I learned after. We called them Stäbchen, little sticks that could make the difference between soup and water. The arithmetic of rationing is relentless. Official daily intake in 1946, 1,000 calories per person in some sectors, sometimes less. Factory work requires 2,500. The deficit is a transaction. The transaction is survival. The first winter is heavy with silence. Women are everywhere. They pick brick. They shovel. They form lines outside ration offices. They return to rooms without windows and relearn cooking without butter, electricity, or meat. Trümmerfrauen, brick women, who were not an army, but worked like one. Photographs. Bundesarchiv prints filed under Bild 1945-46 show scarves, wheelbarrows, a city. There is fear of retribution. It is not a single fear. It is layered, Fear of the Soviets, fear of the Allies, fear of neighbors, fear of questions. Denazification is a word that carries the sound of a file cabinet. For Karl, it begins in whispers. Were you Hitler Youth? Yes, everyone was. Did you go to the meetings? Yes, sometimes. Did you go to the meetings? Yes, sometimes. Did you carry a weapon? A Panzerfaust once. Did you fire it? Karl is 17 when the Soviets take his street. He is 18 when he leaves the city. The reasons are practical. There is no work. A neighbor knows someone in the British zone who can find a warehouse job. There is also the rumor of an aunt in Hildesheim. There is also the knowledge of the interzonal pass system closing. He walks with a friend along roads that now stand for borders. They are turned back once, then slip through in a freight car. The geography of survival is a map with no legend. British military government records for Lower Saxony, autumn 1946, note, a considerable influx of unregistered persons from the Soviet zone seeking employment and sustenance. They are not all political. Politics is a luxury of a full stomach. By October, Karl is in Hildesheim, sleeping on a kitchen floor that is better than 3 other places he has tried. He will carry this bed with him in memory. The mathematics of rooms is cruel. A town half in ruins must double itself to house the expellees coming from the other Germany, the other East. Expulsion, always in plural. From East Prussia, Silesia, Pomerania, the Sudetenland. 12 million people. The numbers oscillate. The human impression is the same. I arrived with a basket. A woman named Jay, born in Breslau, told an interviewer in 1990. The basket held a towel, a photograph, and the bread we were given at Görlitz. Oral histories deposit their own sediment, fragments, the ash of a note burned, a tone of voice that tells you more than the words. Municipal files in Hildesheim from 1946 to 1947 list Wohnungszuweisungen, allocations of rooms, one family to a living room, another to the kitchen, the original tenant confined to a bed behind a curtain. The arithmetic of space is simple. 4 walls divided by the number of bodies that need them. Tension becomes policy. Locals speak of the refugees, as if misfortune can be a category of otherness. Refugees call the locals the natives and resent the half-ruins that are still theirs. Fistfights over cookstoves, whispered insults over latrines. The municipal police note disturbances and mutual allegations of theft. A British report from April 1947 cautions that resentment toward expellees is growing in market towns due to competition for employment and scarce foodstuffs. Denazification comes as paper. The Fragebogen, the questionnaire, 131 questions at its longest. Did you belong to the NSDAP? The SA? The SS? The Hitler Youth? The NSFK? NSKK? Did you subscribe to Volkssturm Beobachter? Did you donate to the Winter Relief? Did you hold a party office? Did you sign petitions? Did you speak publicly? Did you benefit materially? The questions are performed with bureaucratic ritual. Allied Control Council Directive No. 38 defines 5 categories: Hauptschuldig, belastet, minderbelastet, Mitlaufer, entlastet, major offenders, offenders, lesser offenders, followers, exonerated. The tables are to be filled, lives are to be sorted. In Hildesheim, Karl sits in a chair before a Spruchkammer in early 1948. He is 19. He brings a letter from his former headmaster in Berlin stating that he was a good pupil and compelled to join the Volkssturm by ordinance. He lists no party membership. He lists the Hitler Youth as compulsory. He lists one instance of military service at age 15-16 in civilian defense. He is placed as Anfaltin 16 in civilian defense. He was a minor. The arithmetic of guilt is clearest at the edges. Children are not subject to great moral arithmetic in the files. Adults are. The system needed stability more than thorough justice. This is not cynicism, it is a description. OMG Gus. Office of Military Government, United States, reports from 1947-1948 note. The backlog of denazification cases, the crying need for administrators, engineers, teachers, policemen to rebuild a functioning society. The Spruce Command categorized 3 million people. Most are Mitlaufer or Minder Belastate, followers or lesser offenders. A small percentage are Belastate, offenders. A smaller fraction are Hauptschuldig, major offenders. The mathematics of guilt is institutional. Responsibility is assigned in bundles, removed in reams, delivered to a society that has to get to work by 8 and be home before curfew. There were prisons. There were internment camps. There were public postings of names. There were also quiet reinstatements. Article 31 of the Basic Law, enacted in 1951, allows former civil servants dismissed because of the war to return or to receive pensions. The arithmetic of the state is additive. You cannot build an administration without administrators. Minutes from the Hildesheim City Council 1952 record the return of 2 former officials. A debate is noted. The vote is recorded. The passage is polite. By 1947, the hunger winter arrives. This one is named. Records call it Der Hunger Winter 1946-47. Rivers freeze. Coal trains stop. Temperatures hold steady below freezing for weeks. Official rations fall to 1,000 calories per day in some places, in others 700. A person can survive on that for a time. Not all do. The calculus of warmth is physical. Blankets plus wood plus human proximity equals sleep that reaches morning. Carl works in a warehouse handling food shipments from British depots and, later, the first trickle of American aid. He is 19. He is not a hero. He is a pair of hands and a back that lifts sacks. He learns to notice labels and to read acronyms, UNRRR, GARR, later ERP. The Marshall Plan is a slogan that becomes a box, that becomes sugar and flour and powdered milk. An Allied photographer takes pictures of smiling children holding tins, and those pictures. I tasted cocoa for the first time in 1948, Carl writes. It tasted like permission to think about something else. In a field outside Hildesheim, not far from a convalescent home, there is a displaced persons camp. It houses Jewish survivors, forced laborers, and former prisoners of war. The fence is not for keeping them in. It is for keeping order. They are waiting to go somewhere, reads a British liaison note from July 1946. They want food. They want papers. They want to be seen. The mathematics of restitution is uneven. German society is still counting its own losses. The DPs count in the hundreds of thousands across the zones. In the town, they are a rumor, a line of figures at dawn, a different language at the market. Carl sees them. He brings bread once, at the request of a pastor who says it will be good for him to participate in charity rather than commerce. He hands a loaf to a man with a tattoo on his forearm and does not look at the numbers. 2 years later, he remembers the numbers but not the face. He writes, "Later, we knew something. We said we didn't, but we knew enough to look away." Allied opinion surveys from 1946 and 1947, OMGUS surveys, record that a majority of Germans had heard of excesses, but only a minority admitted knowledge of specific killings. If it was done by others. This is not a sentence but a social fact. Denial is not a single act. It is ongoing maintenance. The arithmetic of memory is subtraction performed until the column balances. A teacher in Hildesheim tells a class in 1950 that patriotism is love for landscape. A war widow tells her son that politics is for men. A shopkeeper says Hitler did good things at first. A former party member says, I was only in the party to get my job. The words are not lies entirely, but they are not confessions. Karl is drafted into civilian work. He takes to it. He may have been a mechanic, but the railway office offers a position after the currency reform of June 1948, when Deutsche Marks replace Reichsmarks and the black market sways, then steadies, then goes underground. He files, he stamps, he tallies freight. He's good with columns. The new money has crisp edges. The new shelves hold soap again. The Berlin airlift is a sky in another place, but also part of the story. It tells everyone that the world has not ended. It has changed municipalities. The Cold War runs through streets like a tram line. The Soviet zone becomes the GDR. The Western zones become the Federal Republic of Germany in 1949. The Basic Law is adopted. Elections are held. Adenauer becomes Chancellor. The mathematics of sovereignty is limited. Allied high commissioners still sign off on laws. The arithmetic of borders in Berlin is a daily reality. Karl, living in Lower Saxony, reads about it in papers. He visits Berlin once before 1961 and walks through places he does not want to see again. On a corner in Lichtenberg, he pauses and then moves. The past is not a place, it is a pressure in his chest. He begins to study. The path is a combination of night classes and a scholarship offered by a Protestant aid society in 1953. The same year, East Berliners rise and are crushed, an event that arrives in the West as headlines and a rumor about where the tanks went. He studies pedagogy and German literature in Göttingen in his mid-20s, while working part-time at the rail yard. He writes a bachelor's thesis on narrative distance in Theodor Storm. The subject is not quite a disguise. He is thinking about how adults explain dangerous things to children. He returns to Berlin in 1958, this time to the western sectors, as a trainee teacher. The city is a case study. The wall is not yet built. People cross in both directions for work. The mathematics of wages draws some east to west. The arithmetic of ideology draws few west to east. He teaches in Wedding. His students are the children of bombed-out three-room apartments grown into one-room cells, the children of expellees from Silesia, the children of laborers who arrive from the Ruhr, from Bavaria, from the still poor edges of a wealth that is beginning to accumulate. The Wirtschaftswunder is not a miracle if you are inside it. It is a series of pay raises and consumer goods that carry more significance than they do weight. A refrigerator, a radio that speaks English and German and advertises products he never imagined he could consider buying. Marshall Plan posters show gears and hands, building, building. The factories in Berlin, in Frankfurt, in Wolfsburg produce cars and typewriters and purpose. Karl sees the care packages still arriving from America for the old women who will never trust a bank again. He notices the difference between sweetened condensed milk and what they know now as milk. We grew used to the heady smell of new linoleum and cold briquettes delivered in orderly piles, he writes in a school notebook margin in 1962. In the Federal Republic, school books in the 1950s and early 1960s do not emphasize perpetrators. They emphasize rubble, hunger, displacement, and the benefits of democracy. This is not a conspiracy. It is an index of what adults think children can carry. It is also an index of what the adults are prepared to admit to themselves. The curriculum guides, preserved in municipal archives, list the burdens of war, the blessings of peace, the value of civic participation. The sections on the dictatorship mention illegality, loss of rights, persecution of minorities, without saying what those words mean in a human body. Karl knows more than he says. He becomes the kind of teacher who does not preach but assigns reading. He gives his students Remark and Verlade and, later, the White Rose leaflets. He does not explain the Volkssturm. He does not yet say that he stood with a Panzerfaust and felt the world narrow to a single shaking breath. He gives them numbers instead. He writes, Directive number 38, 5 categories, on the blackboard and asks them to imagine being judged by a form. He writes, Hunger Winter, 1,000 calories, and asks a girl in the second row who runs track if she has ever tried to run on a single apple and a crust of bread. He writes, Expellees, 12 million T, under Jews in Europe before 1939, 500,000, without connecting the numbers aloud. The files deepen as his career does. The Bundesarchiv opens more holdings, the Arolsen archives. Then the International Tracing Service begin to release more names. Survivors he once saw as shadows at the edge of a town gather in testimonies that are published, occasionally excerpted in newspapers that also publish advertisements for washing machines. In 1960, he is 31. Eichmann is kidnapped, then tried in Jerusalem. The trial is in another country but on their television. People in West Germany watch and do not look away because the women of 1946 who taught them to look away are not in the room. He watches, returns to his class, writes without explanation on the board, the mathematics of law, the trial of one man, the weight of many crimes. He marries. He and his wife Erika share a one-bedroom apartment in Wedding with a view of a courtyard where children play between lines of laundry. They have a son in 1963. That year, in August 1961, the wall has already gone up. The city becomes a geography lesson that requires chalk and patience, and an ability to answer questions with more questions. Why did they build a wall? To keep people in. Why did people want to leave? Because choices matter. Why weren't they allowed to choose? Because the people holding power were afraid of loss. He keeps a map on the wall and allows the silence after his answers to fill with the sound of chalk. There is contact with victims again, this time with names and quiet voices. A displaced persons camp now being shuttered holds a reunion before closing. A man comes to the school in 1965 to talk, invited by the pastor who once sent bread with Karl. The man speaks fast, in an accent that is part Polish, part German, part something else. He rolls up his sleeve and shows the tattoo as if it were obvious that this is what one does when one tells the truth. Karl watches his students watching the numbers. He sees a girl from Breslau lean forward. He sees a boy from Hildesheim stiffen. He hears the sound his own breath makes when he is about to say something and chooses not to. He begins to write in notebooks, not for publication, for practice, for making sense. He writes lists. He writes, the mathematics of guilt, who serves, who is forgiven, who is promoted. He writes, the arithmetic of rooms, who slept on the floor, who slept in a bed, who stands now to lecture. He writes, the calculus of survival, cigarettes, coal, cousin-in-law with a job in the ration office. He writes, a boy and a Panzerfaust. He writes, a boy and a Panzerfaust. He writes, a man and a chalkboard. In 1968, the wave hits Germany too. Students march. They speak about their parents. They accuse who is forgiven, whose cigarettes, coal, cousin-in-law with a job in the ration office. They are right and they are wrong, and the balance shifts according to the person you ask. For Karl, the marches are a noise he feels in his chest but does not join. He respects them. He changes his syllabus. He adds more primary sources. He reads aloud from testimonies that are uncomfortable. He still does not say, I was there with a weapon in my hand. He is waiting, perhaps, for his son to be old enough to hear it. The Federal Republic is stable. The economy has lifted enough to create a new class of questions. Willy Brandt kneels in Warsaw in 1970. The gesture cuts clean through the noise of statements. Older men say it was unnecessary. Younger ones say it was the least he could do. Karl watches at home. He is 39. He does not kneel. He writes in his notebook. The mathematics of gestures, one man on his knees, millions of people watching, a pestle against denial. Public commemorations in his town prioritize suffering that is easiest to honor. Bombing raids. Night of July 22-23, 1943, the plaque says, though this is the wrong date for his town, and the plaque is for the feeling. There is a monument for expellees that says, "We will not forget our homeland." There is no monument in his neighborhood for the Jews of Hildesheim. There is a list of names in a synagogue preserved as a storehouse, then as a ruin, then as a memorial. It is uneven, he writes to himself. It will not be even in my lifetime. Meanwhile, the state maintains files. Denazification files are used to sort pension claims. Pension authorities measure service with rulers that move. Midlerfer, with 40 years of civil service, reads a pension board note in 1972. Art. 31 applicable. The 32-1 applicable. The 31ers are a category in the politics of the 1950s and 1960s. They are a rumor in the 1970s, and then a demographic fact again in the 1980s as pensions are recalculated. Karl is never one of them. He served in a warehouse and then in a classroom. The arithmetic of his claim is simple. Years taught times base pay times cost of living index equals a figure that he will never look at without thinking of cigarettes. What he does have is testimony. He keeps the notebooks going. He includes quotes from students. My grandfather never talked about it, one writes. He cried when we asked. Another, my mother says the Russians were animals. The history book says the Nazis were criminals. Where is the space for both of these things? He copies these into his notebook with dates and initials thereafter because he is a teacher who understands that memory can be a document if it is framed correctly. He also keeps his own file. It is not in a government office. It is not in a government office. It is in his desk. It contains a ration card from 1946. It contains a photograph of a friend from the Hitler Youth with whom he has never reconnected. It contains his denazification certificate with Entlastet stamped across the top. It contains a copy of his first teaching contract. It contains an American cigarette, never smoked, flattened and brown, kept as an artifact of his own black market education. On the paper folded around the cigarette, he writes, "The economy of rescue. 1 cigarette equals 1 meal equals 1 afternoon without anger." He does not join the peace movement in the 1970s formally. He is suspicious of movements. He is wary of slogans. He has had enough of the certainty that carries slogans. But he teaches Krieg und Frieden and Remarque and Bull and Heinrich Bull's speeches about the moral responsibility of words. He teaches them in a voice that carries an edge now. He writes on the board in 1973, Bundeswehr founded 1955. Below, my age then, 26. Below, I chose a classroom. He underlines chosen. He underlines classroom. Letters appear in his mail in the 1970s from former students. They write from West Germany's abroad. We read you now differently, one says from Paris. Another writes from Hamburg, my father still does not speak. But I think of your way of counting, the arithmetic of guilt. I try to count for him. The language is not entirely his. Language escapes. There are, in the background of his personal story, the larger narratives that do not yield to personal interpretation. The East German state has its own propaganda about anti-fascism and enemy aggression, yet its own files are shrouded, and its own denazification is thorough in some sectors, perfunctory in others. The West forgives to rebuild. The East reassigns to re-educate. Both states have schools. Both have children who ask questions. Both have adults who prefer some answers to others. In 1975, the Cold War feels like weather. US troops remain. British troops march in parades. French gendarmes stroll in places where Kaiser spires tilt against the sky. East German border guards look through binoculars from towers that cut the horizon. Television carries the names of towns the viewers will never enter. These facts matter for daily life mostly in the way they limit routes home from family visits and shape the way parents answer questions about cousins left in the East. In his classroom that year, Carl decides to write the line. He has to teach 16-year-olds about war. Not a specific war. War is an arrangement of power that spreads until it includes children. He wants to say something honest. He wants to say something dangerous, in the sense that truth is dangerous when it complicates the good story. He writes, 1945, outskirts of Berlin. They gave me a Panzerfaust and told me to stop tanks. In 1975, I tell my students, if anyone hands you a weapon at 16, run. He says it in a classroom in West Berlin, where the police are not going to arrest him for defeatism. He says it in a city where the echo of that line, if uttered in April 1945, would have meant someone called it treason. His students are quiet. He tells them a little more. He leaves out details that would turn the story into a through line that centers himself. He knows the mathematics of humility. It is not the false humility of the Mitläufer who says, I was only a follower. It is the humility of someone who understands that a boy with one weapon and one instruction is not the center of a history that includes columns of people with numbers tattooed into their skin. He writes a homework assignment. Find one document. Could be a denazification file, a ration card, an expellee registration, an occupation report. Describe the arithmetic it contains. Numbers matter, so do omissions. They bring back a Spruchkammer notice that demotes a man from a job he later returns to. They bring a ration card for October 1946 with a handwritten note, cannot feed the children on this. They bring a photograph of a grandmother in a headscarf carrying a basket. They bring an Allied poster about the Marshall Plan with mechanized optimism and an Expellee Club poster about Heimat. The file grows in the classroom, photocopies, stories, receipts. The economics of memory is here measured in pieces of paper. He decides then to write a longer line to himself. He opens a new notebook. He dates the first page. He writes, 12 March 1975, Wedding, West Berlin. He writes the line as if it were a headline for his own archive. He adds details. My father never came back from the Oder front. My mother died in 1956 from a thing that might as well have been called fatigue. My sister married a man from Bremen who sells radios and now lives in a house with heated floors. She still calls Breslau by its German name. I learned to speak in numbers first and names later. I do not forgive myself or anyone else, but I know where to place blame. I place it in systems. I place it in slogans. I place it in the curiosity of adults who put weapons in the hands of boys and call it salvation. The document record swells around this life. Bundesarchiv holds files about denazification. Allied intelligence summaries that once carried secrets now teach. Oral histories collected by universities in the 1980s add echoes later. The mathematics of history is not finite. It compounds. In some of those archives, there is an interview with a Tremmerfrau named E., recorded in 1984, who says, "We were proud of ourselves then, not because of what came before, but because of what we did after. We made soup out of nothing. We pulled bricks so you could walk." Her voice carries a complexity that does not diminish anything else. It adds, There is a DP testimony recorded in 1946 by a British officer who had no training in interviewing trauma. The witness, called M, says, "I am at present in a camp. I wait to go to Palestine. I do not speak to Germans except when I must.